so much for that. It's amazing what a little LinkedIn will do for people. Let me make sure that everybody can hear me all the way to the back. Can you hear me all right? Great. I'd like to start off sharing a true story. This gentleman, is there any way to turn that off?
Yes.
Thank you. This gentleman is the CEO in a biomed company in Seattle. He went there to speak to some VCs about raising money for his business. He shared all the stats, all the information, how many lives could be saved, the reason why these lives would be saved, because this particular piece of equipment would make all the difference in the world. And when he finished, nobody invested, not a one. He went back to do a presentation again a couple of months later. This time, he shared the real story, why he was CEO of this company to begin with, and it had to do with his mother, and how his mother lost her life. And he made a decision at that particular point that something could be done about it, and he was going to be the guy to do it. This time, he was able to engage people to see it his way, and to speak to him about giving him the money that he needed to make his business happen. It's very simple. The reality of it is that when it comes to storytelling, it is the language of leaders. That's why I want to talk about it with you today. Now, for those of you who have been in sessions that I've done before, you'll know that I like to do things on an interactive kind of basis, because my goal is to make sure that everybody here today leaves with something that is of value from this particular session. Because we have so many people, I'm not going to go through one by one, but I'm going to ask you to think for a second, raise your hand, and just shout out to me and say, this is what I want to walk away with in storytelling, so that we can make sure you get as much bang for your buck as possible. Anybody want to go first? Okay, session's done. David.
How do I take technical data and make it digestible as a story? How do I use story for that?
Okay. All right, anybody else? Yes.
How do you deal with people who view stories as you're ignoring the point? You're using all this fluff to obfuscate.
All right, so how do you get them to realize that you're not doing that?
Yeah.
Okay. Not using story as fluff. That's great. Do we have someone over here?
Using stories to sell.
Is the story always to be true?
Could it be a tall tale? Story always needs to be true. Yeah, I think the simple answer to that is yes, and also, are you a habitual liar? No, I'm not saying you are. Because if you are, you're probably going to just say whatever anyway. Right?
When I try to say that story, what happens generally, people think, oh, this person is very oldie, and now he's sharing his experience. So you can do this thing. And I'm trying to say a story.
So how are you?
It was like I'm just sharing my experience. Oh, 15 years ago I did this. 20 years ago I did this. So you did so many things. I was 65 years old. Oh, I was saying you have done so many things and we don't know anything. How to balance that? Not to look like arrogant or showing more than what you can.
Balance how much to share. All right? Yes?
So I heard the best way to tell a story is to go through a hero story, to take your audience to a journey and bring them back. So how do you incorporate that hero's journey into a topic like a very technical dry
Okay. Good, thank you.
How is storytelling different in one-on-one versus addressing a larger audience?
One-on-one versus a larger audience. Okay, a lot of good stuff here.
How do you tailor your stories for a different audience, whether it's your peers or your upper management?
Different audience, all right. Next.
How do you connect with people that got stories, they have no interest in the story, they want the hard facts? How do I make that connection?
Just the facts, ma'am?
Just the facts.
The facts incorporate a story, okay? Anyone else? Just a couple more.
How do you know that storytelling is the right approach?
Okay. Is the right approach?
Yeah, mine is along Ed's lines. How do you keep someone interested so that they're willing to hear the story to the end? Like how much detail to include or not to include? How to build up the suspense?
Okay. These are a lot of very, very good questions, and I'm going to take them pretty much in the order that I see them here. Technical data, how to use story. One of the best things that I ever learned is that, by the way, I just have to share this. I never got into stories like I did once I got into Toastmasters. My first advanced manual was a storytelling manual. That was the first one that I selected, and the reason why I selected it is because it looked like fun. I had no idea I was going to learn so much and that it was going to change me on so many different levels in terms of how I work, how I communicate with my family, how I do everything that I do. And it's really been for the better for me. So for those of you who are moving towards an advanced manual, by all means, grab the storytelling manual, and it is a lot of fun, but also expect to have a real life-changing experience. I used to be one of those people that when I would do my workshops, they would be informative and amazing and dry like a bone. I could give you so many stats on so many different things and so much detail, and you know what? Nobody would remember it the next day. And the reason why I know that is because they would say, what was that you said about, and I realized that it wasn't very effective, but I didn't know any other way. Once I did the storytelling manual, just for the heck of it, just to test myself out, because I think that not only is Toastmasters a learning lab, but life itself is a learning lab. I decided to use a story. And I used the story, and days later they were talking about this one story that I shared, this one story. All of a sudden I realized, wow, there is power and magic with storytelling. And I started studying it, buying books on it, testing it out in different ways, and using it. There's so many great resources out there. The reality of it is that when we're presenting data, we're only presenting one side of the story. We're just giving information. When we add the story to it, we are now giving people knowledge. That's the big difference. So one of my favorite equations is just to remember that data plus storytelling equals knowledge. And take that with you everywhere. There's always a great story for absolutely everything that you have to present. People in sales and marketing know that rather well, because in sales and marketing, the whole goal is the same as that CEO's goal in Seattle, which is to get people to see things your way. Engineers have to do that too. You want people to look at things your way, but how do you make it happen? The very first thing is to remember that it's not about you, it's never about you, it's about whoever it is you're presenting to. And it doesn't make a lot of difference if you're presenting to just one person or if you're presenting to 100 people. It's about that audience. When we were talking about my coming to do this workshop, one of the things that we talked about is who's the audience going to be, who are the people that are going to be here, what would they benefit from, and that's how we decided on this particular subject for this workshop tonight. So when I hear some of the questions that we're talking about, if you stop for a second and say, who is my audience? Who am I speaking to? You'll start to change the tactics that you use. If we talk about a hero's journey, but it doesn't resonate for some reason, then maybe that's not the way that you want to go. Maybe you want to think about doing something else. There's different ways of telling stories. One way of telling stories is to tell the personal story. I just shared a mini personal story with you about how I used to do my workshops, what I got out of Toastmasters. Those were a couple of little stories right there. There's the personal professional story, and that would be more when I shared how my workshops changed. It's a personal story, but it's me in a professional context. all right? There's the professional story. That's when I was sharing about the CEO. It's a professional story, but it's not about me, it's not personal, but it's about the effectiveness of what happened. And then there is the universal fables and myths kind of stories, the things where you're talking about David and Goliath, as an example. We've been David and Goliath long enough, we've been David long enough, now it's time for us to sling and to make things happen. And by the way, a story doesn't have to be the whole long thing, especially if you take that tact. If you're using something that's universally known, again, like David and Goliath, you only have to mention it, and people will start to understand where you're coming from. Because in storytelling, the other part that's super important in business, at least, is not to tell people that 2 + 2 makes 4. It's to say 2 + 2. And let them come up with what the answer is going to be. Does that make good sense? Okay. So I guess basically what I would say to you as far as technical data, as far as storytelling is concerned, is put the story in there. It can be technical, but there's a reason why you're sharing that technical data. Very recently, David and I were working together on a reformation of District 4. And we were looking at a lot of data, but the important thing came down to the members, thinking about how's it going to be for the members, what members will feel about this, what are they going to feel about that. It was about their story. And in my mind, the way that I made it work is I stopped thinking about all of these members because it's all a bunch of people, right? And I thought about just one member. Because if you think about just one person, and you think in terms of how is this important to this one person, it gives you focus and it gives you clarity in terms of where you're going to go thereafter. Now the next thing that we have here is not using story as a fluff. Not having people think you're using story as a fluff. You've got to test drive it. It's one of those things, again, where you have to tell the stories, but less is always more, in my opinion. If you're going to share information at work, instead of doing a whole long story maybe that leads up to it, think to yourself, how can I just put in a small amount of story to test drive it first? I don't want them to think that it's fluff, all right? Certainly in that case, we were talking about a few minutes ago about the personal story. There's where a personal business story would probably work, and keeping it very short too. If you're working on a project, why are you working on that project? What kind of pain is it that you know you need to solve? And again, bringing it down to, well, there's this person who's got this issue, and this particular project that I'm working on will help that person with that issue. They had a very interesting survey that they did where they had these brochures made that gave you, it was one of those things like Save the Child, or like send your money to Uragua or something like that. And what happened was they found that if they had the brochures that just had broad information that showed you all these different kids needed all this kind of help, people didn't give very much money. But when they would zoom in and they would talk about one child and show that one child's picture and share that one child's story and share that one child's pain, then people would give money. That's what makes a big difference right there. So less is more, and just test drive it a little bit and see what you can do to make it your personal professional story and just about you, or maybe the people that are in the pain that you're trying to solve for them. Using stories to sell. That's the whole point of stories, I think. When I shared that story with you just now about the CEO, the reason why I shared that story with you is I thought to myself, what is my objective? Whenever I'm preparing a workshop or a speech or anything that I do, I always write one sentence for myself. And the thing is, what is my objective? Just one sentence. Because if I start writing way too many things, it's not going to be very good. I just have to have one objective. Because, by the way, I am the queen of going down the bunny trail. I'll say, well, I can do this, and we can add this in there too, it'll be wonderful, it'll be great, etc. And before you know it, it's just a mess. One objective. So I shared that story with you as an opener so that you would get the relationship between this same person not sharing a story and not getting the funding versus the gentleman who finally, that same person, who finally did share the story of what motivated him to begin with, which is what motivated everyone else. Because people, when you just share data, that goes back to this point again, they're really only thinking with two parts of the brain. But the minute that you share story and you can bring emotions in, you've got the whole person. It's very interesting because there's this new concept nowadays where they don't talk so much in terms of how it's B2B or B2C, business to business or business to consumer, but that it's really H to H. Who said heart to heart? Yeah, that's what my husband said too. It's true, it's human to human, but it's also heart to heart. And actually I like heart to heart better. Because the fact of the matter is that even in business, we really are thinking, do I like that person? Do I like what that person is saying? How do I feel about that person? When all things are said and done, if I've got two people that are trying to sell me something, the one that really resonates for me, not necessarily because of the technical stuff that he or she shared, but because of the heart of the person, that's the person I'm probably going to give the business to. Definitely. All right, let's see here. So does that answer the question for stories to sell? All right. Stories always need to be true. Where's that liar who said that? There you are. Like I said, it depends on who you are, basically. I would say that there are enough true stories out there that you don't really have to make it up. That's what I would say. It's so great to have the internet because you can do research for all sorts of things. Where if it isn't just your own personal story, you can find something out about it. There's always some kind of a legend out there too, or a myth, that you can take and mold into what it is that you want to share. I think there's enough true good stuff out there that you don't really need to do that. But again, who am I to judge? Let's see. Being judged. Balance being judged. Who said being judged?
I think I kind of did.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
They're looking, they don't want to, they just want the nuts and bolts. They don't want to have to listen to a story. They're judging you based upon, oh, this guy's wasting my time, versus just get to the point.
Right. It's all about how you do it. It's about how you frame the whole thing. Because in a business meeting especially, if you say, hey, I have to share a story with you, you might lose people. They might tune out. But if you start to share the presentation and say, there's a situation where this is very, very important. In fact, I was speaking to so-and-so, or I heard about da-da-da-da, that you've now integrated it into your presentation, so it doesn't feel like this exterior component. It feels like a true integration. And that's the thing to work on. Sometimes I think we think that we have to tell the story in the very beginning, and we can, we certainly can. That's a very logical place. But there are a lot of times, though, where when we're doing the story, we want to do it as almost like a tapestry, where you weave it into whatever it is that you're presenting, or whatever your thought is. It will help a lot of times with drawing people in to seeing your point of view, or understanding what it is that you're trying to do. All right? Does that help you? Balance, how to share. It's a very careful thing. And it's one of those things, this is what's so great about Toastmasters. In fact, I'll tell you, the challenge for everybody here is for the next bunch of speeches that you do it storytelling style. Whatever the project is, you can always do it storytelling style, right? Challenge yourself that way, because there's no better environment to really kick it around than in this environment here. It's a learning lab. It's a safe place. It's a place where if you tell a story and it doesn't seem to be working out so well, Well, you won't use that story again. And the more information, by the way, that you can feed your fellow members about what it is that you're doing, you did such a wonderful job with the introductions. I really appreciated that. You want to bring your own introductions if you can and say, I'm working on storytelling, this is going on in work, and I'm thinking about this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be the work situation, but something like that, so you can get great feedback from your peers and you'll learn how to tweak it and change it and improve it and make it better. All right? Hero story. Well, I think we did talk about that. I kind of skipped that somehow or another. I went into that already. To me, really, the hero story is a great one. It really is. Have you read Joseph Campbell's book? Does anybody know the name of the book? It's like right on the tip of my tongue. Do write down Joseph Campbell and look for his book. And it's something like A Hero's Journey, I think.
The Hero with 1,000 Faces?
No. I think it's A Hero's Journey, perhaps. Do get that book because it teaches you so much about the history of storytelling and the uses of it and everything. I mean, stories, if you think about it, stories is, we're all here because of stories. Apple is certainly here because of stories. And I mean that in a really positive way. Really, I do. Even though I have a galaxy. The reality of it is that the best things that have happened from storytelling, even before we could communicate with writing and all that other stuff. So I would suggest that you get that book and check it out. But again, it's about the audience, right? So if you think about the hero's journey.
It is called a hero's journey.
Okay. If you think about that, but it's not appropriate for your audience, get rid of it. Even though you really want to share it and you want to do it, save it for somebody else. Do it in the club or something like that. Always, always, always think of your audience first and foremost. That's the most important reason. That's why you're speaking, period. Let's see. Oh, one-on-one versus larger audiences. This was the thing that really helped me a lot with my fear of public speaking. I would spend the first 20 minutes, even in workshop facilitation, which I did way longer before I even came to Toastmasters, in utter fear of the people that I was speaking in front of. It was awful, and they could tell. They could tell. And by the way, my first workshops were with all women, and they were ruthless sometimes, right? Which really did not add to my joy whatsoever. One day, I decided, you know, it's really good sometimes, by the way, I just have to make a side note, it's really, really good sometimes when people make you mad. Because when people make you mad, you become more resilient, and you say, okay, all right, you are not going to get me down. And then you do your own thing, which is wonderful. And that's exactly what happened with me. I became even more resilient. And what I decided was I was not going to think in terms of coming into a room and working with a large group of women. I decided that I was going to come into a room and I was going to speak to one woman. Because anybody can speak to just one person, even me. And then what I realized is that when you're speaking to one person at a time, you are speaking to a whole bunch of other people. As an example, when you think about your eye contact, if you're looking around and darting all the time when you're looking, that's not speaking to one person at a time. But if you can hold your fix for at least one sentence, or half a sentence, or maybe even a paragraph, then you're speaking to one person at a time. So one person or 100, it doesn't really matter. It only matters that you know who it is that you're speaking to and what their objective and goal is, so that you can make sure that what you're sharing with them will make sense and resonate. How to tailor your story to different audiences. You have to know your audience. Again, that goes back to that same thing again. Just the facts, ma'am. Who said that? Just the facts.
Friday.
Yeah, Friday did. Yeah. Oh, you said it. Oh, well, we covered that then. Okay, so we're good. And yeah, it was Friday who said that. Let us see. Storytelling is the right approach. I must say that I have found, since I discovered this gold thing, I have found that storytelling is most often the right approach for just about anything. In your personal life, in your professional life, somebody had said something about, oh, you know, I don't want them to think I'm an old fogey. I'm talking about so many different stories, etc. Anybody can hear one little story, though. And you know the best way, by the way, if it's with your children, is it with your children we're talking about?
No, office colleagues. no one is saying, but I think that I'm having lots of experience. Do I have anything left and new to learn from that person? Or if there's a new system, I go 10 years back, oh, I did these things with that system. Let me tell you about that system. Then I start describing that. Then that person I think that person is thinking that, oh, looks like he's going 10 years back, things have changed. That's not the way to do it. So that's the thing I have in my mind, that should I continue sharing my story or just listen to what he's saying?
Here's the thing, I think when you have a situation like that, I would just ask the person, you know, this has been my experience from 10 years ago, do you want me to share that with you? And then let that person say yes or no, and just be, hopefully you have enough of a rapport with that person that if they say no, it's not going to be anything that's going to be weird or whatever, you will just accept it for what it is. But we don't really want to feel foolish, which is what you're trying to avoid, right? You want to know that what you're saying is being valued, and there's nothing wrong with that. So just say, oh, I remember a situation like that, do you mind if I share? And then see where they say from that. But also, I think what we're talking about mostly is storytelling in a way that will get you to where it is that you want to go. And so the question then that you might want to ask yourself too is, will sharing this story help me achieve my objective? And if the answer to you is probably not with this guy or this gal or this group or whatever, then say, okay, ditch the story, ditch it, and then do something different instead. And let's see. And that was the last question, and we're at the yellow light. Does anybody have any other questions? I probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. Yes?
What's the difference between sharing an example, or giving an example, or telling a story? Or can I say an example is also kind of short story?
Yes, definitely. I love this. I have to share this with you because this is the difference between telling a story and an example. All right, an example could be the king died and then months later the queen died. Or it could be the king died and then months later, out of grief, the queen died. That second one is definitely a story, right? Out of grief. You just put those couple of words in there and now you've got a story. You've got something that someone puts their mind in a different kind of frame. But a lot of examples are actually stories. And they're particularly good to use if you've got a shorter presentation, like let's say one-on-one with your boss. An example a lot of times will underscore your objective on what it is that you want to get. And one more question? Yes?
How do you spin a story out of something that you pretty much went through privately that didn't involve other people who you can give dialogue to?
All right, can you ask me one more time?
Say there's something you went through that was just your own experience. It didn't really involve other people. Maybe it happened entirely on an emotional or an intellectual level to yourself. How do you make a story about that when there's no other characters involved that you can give any dialogue to or any interaction?
You don't need to give dialogue to it. You can just express it yourself. But again, you just want to make sure that it's relevant to whomever it is that you're sharing it with. That there's a reason why that person is going to want to hear it. So as long as you do that, you're fine. But you don't need to have characters or any of those sort of things. It could just be as simple as, I was working to solve this problem, and then I realized that this was an even larger problem, so I took this on, and here's the solution. That's a little story right there. And it lets somebody know what you're doing, and it lets somebody also know what you're thinking about, how your order of thinking is working. All right? Okay, I think we are out of time. Was this helpful to everybody? And to our guests here, come back and do this. You'll be surprised what you get out of it. I'm telling you, it is a game changer in your life. No 2 ways about it. Mr. Toastmaster.
I will tell you from experience, it's good when I actually stop and